All right, well, why don't we get started then? We have 3 minutes after the hour. So, welcome to the Debugging 5 times faster with GitHub Copilot workshop. Now, is it actually 5 times faster? I think it probably is, but your mileage may vary. What I'm going to show you today are just some tips and tricks, some strategies that you can use to debug coding situations across the stack. So, we're going to look at things like fixing tests, running commands with Copilot. We're going to look at debugging issues that span across environments, so like a server and a client environment. And we're also going to look at how we can use MCP servers to connect to databases with Copilot. So it's just like a lot of different scenarios that we're going to walk through, a lot of things that we're going to look at. And it should give all of us a good idea by the end of exactly how to address different debugging situations with Copilot. And if anyone has any questions as we go along, please just put them in the chat. I'm going to try to answer as much as I can. Or if you want to just hop on the mic and ask the question, that's fine as well. All right, so the agenda for today, first thing we're going to do is take 10 to 15 minutes to get everybody set up. Now, the setup is a little bit involved. We're going to be using a Docker container. So I'm going to ask that everybody either has Docker installed or try to get Docker installed. This is one of those ones where it can sometimes take a little bit and it can sometimes be a little time consuming. I sent an email out yesterday with some setup steps. Hopefully some of you were able to complete those. But if not, we should have a little bit of time to get you set up. If you don't have enough time or if the setup doesn't go well, that's okay. You can still follow along with the workshop. I'll be demoing everything, so you'll still get a lot out of it. But if you want to follow along, then you'll have to do all the setup steps. So once we're set up, then we're going to talk about tasks and prompts. So I'm going to show you how you can get Copilot to essentially automate all the different tasks that you need to do in your code base. Things like building the project, running the tests, cleaning things like linting, resetting databases, running end-to-end tests, starting up development servers, all the sort of tasks and things that you'd have to do in your code base on a day-to-day basis. We can automate that with Copilot, and I'll show you how integrating it with Copilot actually allows Copilot to have like an insight into what's going on, and it's just super powerful. Then we're going to look at a common debug loop, which is the fail-fix-retry. We're going to use this to fix some failing unit tests. So the idea here is that we get Copilot to run a test or run a linter or, do something that can produce errors. And then if there are errors, Copilot tries to fix those errors and then reruns the tests or whatever and just kind of keeps looping in that way. And then we're going to talk about client and server debugging. So this is a specific situation where you'd have like maybe a web browser and then you'd have like a web server and you want to be able to debug, situations that involve both of those things. So, maybe there's a situation where you have a UI component and you click on it and then it calls the server and then it comes back with a bad response or something. You'd want to be able to have Copilot look at both environments together and be able to debug that way. So we're going to talk about that. Then we're going to talk about database debugging. So how do we connect Copilot up to a database so it can see what's in the database? Maybe it can make changes to the database. In this case, we're going to be using Postgres. And then if we have time, we're going to look at live browser logs. So how you can have Copilot actually like look inside your browser and see any of the logs or any of the errors that are happening. So that's the basic agenda. Hopefully we get through everything. If not, it's all documented, and I'll show you that in a second where we have all this written out. So the workshop setup, there's a few things that we're going to need to do. We're going to take 10 to 15 minutes to get this set up. It is a little bit involved, like I said, so if you can't get everything set up in time, that's okay. I would say just either try to keep getting it set up, and I have instructions there, or just kind of watch me and you can follow along, and I think you'll get probably 80% out of this, even if you're not like doing it with me. So we're going to need to get Docker installed and running. We're going to need VS Code installed. And I'm going to ask that you all, if you can, upgrade your VS Code to the latest version because we're using kind of cutting edge features in VS Code because it's all, with Copilot and this, it's all getting updated kind of every day. So if you have like the latest version, then you shouldn't have too many problems. Then we're going to need to get GitHub Copilot enabled. So hopefully you all have Copilot enabled, and that's just as simple as like signing in through GitHub, and then you can enable that. We're going to clone the Taskflow repo, and I'm going to walk through exactly what that is. This is the repo where we're going to be running all of our kind of debugging scenarios from. And then finally, we're going to open that in a dev container and we're going to open Copilot in agent mode. So like I said, there's a lot here. I'm going to walk through all of it slowly, and I have instructions written out if you guys want to follow along kind of in the background or just follow along with me. And if you have any questions or anything's going wrong, just put something in the chat or speak up over the mic and I can try to help you. But like I said, we're going to take 10 to 15 minutes to do this, and then I'm just going to move on. So even if you can't get it set up, it's okay. You'll still get a lot out of this. All right, so yeah, let's do the setup now. So I have here a document, and this is kind of our document that we're all going to be using. And let me know if anyone can't access this. I just put it in the chat. This document is sort of a one sheet that describes everything that I'm going to be going through in this workshop. So we have all the slides here. We have just like a description of this workshop, what it focuses on, and you guys can all reference this after the workshop as well. And then down here we have setup and prerequisites. So I'm going to ask that everybody do your best to try to follow along with these and get all this stuff set up in the next 10 to 15 minutes. I'm going to be walking through it step by step, and we'll kind of look at what we need to do. So the first thing that we can do here is install Docker Desktop. Hopefully a lot of you already have that installed. This is probably the one that's the most difficult to get set up, just because sometimes you have to like restart your computer. This is kind of a big program that's going to be running, but generally you would just go to this website here and then you can download it for whatever system. So for those of you who don't know, I'll just give you a quick overview of what Docker is. It's essentially a place where we can run our code base that's consistent across all environments. So if I'm running on Mac and you're running on Windows and someone else is running on Linux, we can all run the same app in the same environment through Docker. And that's why it's really good for these workshops, is because I can just set up the code base once, and then if we all run it through Docker, then everybody kind of gets the same setup. And if you already know all this or you already have this set up, just bear with me. I'm just going to be walking through this slowly so everyone kind of has a chance and we just get it on the recording. So yeah, go ahead and install that, and you may need to restart your computer. Hopefully you don't have to, but if you need to do that, you can leave the meeting and come back, or like I said, just kind of watch me and just sit back and relax. So once Docker is set up, and just kind of do that in the background here, or hopefully you already have it set up, then we're going to make sure that VS Code and Copilot is set up. So I have VS Code open over here, and this is where we're going to be doing all of our programming from. So in VS Code, we can integrate in with GitHub Copilot. So GitHub Copilot will run inside of VS Code, and then it can modify and look through all our files and do all of that stuff. So with Copilot, you can go up to code, to extensions, and I think there's just a Copilot extension that we can look at. Yeah, so here, the GitHub Copilot extension, you can install that. And when you install that, it's going to ask you to sign in with GitHub, and you can kind of sign in there. And all of this is run through GitHub. So that's kind of who owns Copilot. Now, once that's installed on VS Code, you can click on this little chat icon up here at the top right, and that will open up the VS Code chat. And then what we want to do is come down here into this little drop down and go to agent mode. Now, again, all of this is documented here in this setup and prerequisites one sheet. So feel free to follow along with that as we're going. I'm just kind of walking through it here for the sake of the video and for anyone who's just watching. So we need Docker installed, and then we also need VS Code open, and we want to make sure that we're in agent mode down here. So this little drop down, we're going to click agent. And then the next step here is to install some VS Code extensions. Now, I talked about how we're going to be running this in Docker, and the idea there is that everybody can run this in the same environment, because I have a lot of debugging scenarios that I want to walk through with all of you, and they're all set up in this one code base that can be run with Docker. Now, we can sort of integrate that in with VS Code using something called dev containers. And it's basically just like you can run Docker stuff in VS Code and it all kind of works, and it'll copy over your file system. And it's very cool how this all works. So there's two extensions here that you can install. There's this dev containers extension. You're going to need that. So just click on that. You can install it. You can also go over into VS Code and to extensions up here. And then you can just type in, what is it? Dev container. Dev containers, and then you can install that. And then the other one that we want to install is this Docker extension. So that'll just allow you to integrate with Docker as well. Okay, so again, everyone hopefully is following this setup. If not, just bear with me. We're going to take a few more minutes and just keep going through this. So we have Docker desktop installed. We have VS Code set up and Copilot extension is installed there, and we're in agent mode. And then we have these VS Code extensions installed. You definitely need dev containers. Docker is probably optional, but it's nice to have so you can integrate in with that. So up here, if you're running Docker, you can see I have this little icon up at the kind of top right of this menu bar. This is Docker running on my computer. I can go to the dashboard and you can see I have some stuff running here. I'm actually going to delete all of this so we can kind of start from scratch, but maybe you already have this set up. You can, do what you need to do with that. But generally, when you install Docker, make sure you open it and then you can kind of configure things because sometimes when you open it, there's extra like install steps. So just be aware of that. Okay, so we're continuing along. Docker desktop. We have VS Code with Copilot. That's all set up. And then we have the VS Code extension for dev containers. Those are the three things that we need to run this app in a very consistent way, consistent environment. And once we have that set up, then we don't need to touch it ever again. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is Taskflow. So Taskflow is a code base that we're going to be using to explain and run through all of these different debugging scenarios. So in Taskflow, I've set up a couple of different Git branches, and on these branches, we have some different debugging scenarios that we're going to look through. Okay, so what we want to do here is we want to clone this down. So you can just come to the Taskflow GitHub repository here, click on this little code button. We're going to copy this. And then here in Visual Studio Code, we're going to open up a terminal. So you can right click new terminal, or you can just do Command or Control J, and that will also open up a terminal. So we want to have the terminal open up here in VS Code. That's very important. If the terminal isn't open in VS Code, Copilot's not going to be able to look at it. So we want to make sure that that's open. Again, you can just type Command J or Control J if you're on Windows, and then this should open. And then from here, we're going to clone the Taskflow repository. So maybe I can make this a little bigger too. I'm going to move into my documents folder, and then we can say git clone and the Taskflow repository after that. Okay. So once again, I was over here on the Taskflow GitHub page. Click on the code button. You can copy this, and then we're just going to say git clone Taskflow. So you're going to pull that down, and then from within the terminal, you want to move into that directory. So I'm going to cd into Taskflow. Okay, so we have Taskflow now downloaded and cloned onto our file system. We've CD'd into it. Now, this part is very important if you want to follow along kind of interactively with the examples here. You need to open up Taskflow in VS Code. The way we open it is very important. So there's a couple ways you can generally open folders in VS Code. You could open it as part of a workspace, so you could like add it to a workspace. Or you can just open it directly as a folder. So you can see here, it's asking me to open the folder, or you can come up here and you could say open folder. You do not want to open this as part of a workspace because we're using dev containers. So for the dev container to work, and I know this is kind of confusing, hopefully people are following along. For the dev container to work, we need to open it as like a standalone folder. So just come up here, file, open folder, and then we're going to select Taskflow. All right, so we've cloned Taskflow. We've opened it in VS Code as a standalone folder, and you can see here up here, it should look like this, where you have these kind of three little tabs, and then Taskflow is up here at the top. And you'll notice that VS Code is asking me if I want to open it in a container. Now, remember, you need the dev containers extension. So once again, up here, code, settings, extensions, type in dev containers, and then we need to install that. If you don't have that installed, it's not going to work. But now that we have Taskflow open up here, it should ask you if you want to open it up in a dev container. If it's not showing up there, you can type Command-Shift-P, and then you can see up here, you could just type in dev containers and then reopen in container, okay? So what this is going to do is it's going to essentially create like a little Docker instance for us. So this is like a little mini operating system that we can run Taskflow inside of. And this is just a consistent environment. So it'll run exactly the same way on my computer as it does on your computer, hopefully. And then we can all have kind of the same situation going on here. Okay, so I'm going to open it in the dev container. And before we move on, one thing I do want to say as well, before we get too deep into this, if you don't have the latest version of Visual Studio Code or like a kind of up-to-date version, you might want to consider updating because we're using these very new features. Like we're going to be using things called tasks. They have made a lot of like changes to this in the later version. So if it's not working or there's things that are breaking or that are weird, it might be because you're on an earlier version. Hopefully you can all run this, but yeah, that's just something to note. And if you need to upgrade it, just come up here. I'm on Mac, but on Windows, I'm sure it's very similar and it should prompt you to upgrade. Okay. So now this is running in a dev container, and you can see here in this terminal, it's actually running a lot of code. So when this goes into the dev container, like I said, this is like a consistent environment where we can all run the same exact project in the same exact environment because Copilot needs all of this to be very consistent. That's another thing with debugging is we need the environment to be consistent so we know what's an actual problem in the app versus what's a problem with the setup. So this is going to run like a setup command, which will install all of the NPM packages. This is a Next.js app, if people are familiar with that. And then we're going to connect to a Postgres database. That's going to get set up. It's going to create a bunch of data for the Postgres database. And then it's going to install some Chromium browsers. This is for the end-to-end test that we're going to write. We have some tests in here that will basically like launch a browser automatically and then run tests against it. And then Copilot can look at those logs. It's really cool. So that's all going to get set up there. And then we're going to run a development server and we should be running the actual app. So in my case, I have here this kind of Taskflow app and this is loaded up. So now we are ready to go on with the rest of the training. So we're about 20 minutes in here. So that is the entire setup. I'm going to walk through one more time everything that you have to do just for the purposes of the recording and for anyone who's following along. And then we'll see how people are doing with that. So actually, before I do that, let me message in the chat. I am set up and ready to go. So if you are set up, you can leave a thumbs up on that post, or I'm just watching and not following along interactively. If you want to thumbs up that, just so I kind of know how people are doing. So once again, we'll walk through exactly the setup steps. So we need Docker desktop installed. It's a environment where we can run things consistently. This is a great idea for debugging, by the way, because you know, if you don't have something like Docker, then maybe the code is breaking on Windows, but it's not breaking on Mac. That could be, you know, that could be something that muddies the waters with debugging. So we need Docker desktop. We're going to set up VS Code with Copilot, and then we're going to install that extension and log in there. And then we're going to install these like dev containers extensions, Docker. We're going to use Taskflow, so we're going to clone that down. And then we're going to be careful to open it as a standalone folder so it looks something like this. And then finally, we're going to open that in a dev container. So again, you can type Command Shift P or Control Shift P if you're on Windows. And this dev containers reopen folder, you can just search for that. Okay, cool. So anyone have any questions before we move on with the training? Looks like a lot of people are kind of set up. And then maybe I'll take one more minute just in case anyone has any lingering questions, and then we'll move on. All right, so I think we can move on then. If you have any questions as we go, just let me know. Or if after the fact you're watching the recording and you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help debug anything I can. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about how we can start debugging in Copilot. Now, I have a slide for this, I think. Yeah. So the first thing that we're going to look at are things called tasks and prompts. So tasks are things that are built into Visual Studio Code. They've actually been around for a while, but now they're getting integrated in with GitHub Copilot. So a task is essentially a way of defining like a task that you would have to perform in your code base, like running code, running your tests, starting your dev server, all the different things that you would need to do in your code base. So in Visual Studio Code, you can open up this .vs code folder, or you would need to add it if you don't have it in your project. So you can create this .vs code folder. And for those with Taskflow, just open this up, and then you'll see down here we have this tasks.json file. So this is a very special file because in here we can define tasks that we register with Visual Studio Code. So if you look here, I have a bunch of these tasks that are kind of defined here. And what a lot of them do is just run like NPM commands. So if you look down here in the package.json file, so this is like the main Node.js file where we can put all of our config stuff. I have a bunch of scripts here. So I have, like run the dev server, build things, run the tests, run the end-to-end tests. So there's a lot of just like scripts here. This is very common in any type of project. You'd have project scripts. We have stuff for managing the database. So inside of these tasks, I can essentially wrap up these uh, project commands, things like, the npm run build command, the npm start command. And what this does is it sort of registers them with Visual Studio Code, and they're just more deeply integrated with everything that Visual Studio Code can do, including with Copilot. So when we run things as tasks, it just, so like I said, kind of registers them with VS Code. It makes them more native to VS Code. And then Copilot can run those tasks. It can read the output. It can rerun the tasks. It's a way of just packaging up all these different scripts, all these different things that we need to do so that Copilot can access them easier and so that VS Code kind of understands them in a more native way. So what I've done here is I've wrapped up a lot of these NPM scripts. And all you have to do is just set up this sort of JSON structure. So there's like a label for the task, where it's going to run in the shell. Here's the actual command that's getting run on the command line. You can group them up, and then there's also some other fields as well. So you can see here, I just have this JSON, and I've defined a lot of these different tasks. So we have a bunch of things for testing. There's things for running the end-to-end tests, all these different things, right? So we can manage the database. So if you want to just look through here real quick, you can see all the different things essentially that we could have Copilot do for us. So what we can do now, and by the way, if you want to follow along with me here, once again, I'm in this one sheet document. So I'm going to paste this in the chat again. And if you come down to the step-by-step walkthrough, then this is kind of what I'm going to be walking through throughout this whole throughout this whole workshop. And if you have any weird issues with Taskflow, just run npm run setup, and it'll just kind of reset everything. That should be kind of a fix all, hopefully. So we're going to start by running our project commands with Copilot. So once again, if you want to follow along there, just you can read through that sheet. I'm just going to be pretty much doing exactly what that says. So we want to open up Copilot chat. So up here again, click this little toggle chat icon at the top right. Make sure that you're in agent mode. And I would highly recommend that you select like a more premium model. So the better the model that you use, the better this whole process is going to go. The one thing about this is it's not strictly deterministic. Like it depends on how smart the AI is. That's how well it'll do at debugging. So I'm just using Claude Sonnet 4.5. That's generally good. So we can ask Copilot like what tasks are available. So I could say what tasks are available to run in the code base. So Copilot kind of understands, because these are registered as tasks, it understands what's available to us. So you can see here it was able to find all of those. Now, if you want to just run a task kind of ad hoc, like without Copilot, you can do Command-Shift-P, and then you could type in run task. Actually, hold on. Sorry, the Zoom interface is like in the way for me here. So you can type in run task, and then this will give you like a list of all the tasks that you have here. So for example, if I wanted to like run the tests, I can just click on test, and then it'll open up a new terminal for us, and then it will run all of the tests. So it's just like a simple way of doing things. But we can also have Copilot do that. So I could say, run the tests just down there. So all I have to do is just tell it, hey, I want you to run the tests. It'll look through all of the tasks that we have registered with VS Code. It'll pick the one that it thinks is appropriate, and then it'll ask us if it can run it. So whenever Copilot wants to run something in the terminal, it'll actually ask you for permission, and you can just let it do this. So you could say, always allow in session or workspace. I'm just gonna kind of prompt it every time so people can follow along. So I'm going to allow it to run the test. Now you'll see what it did is it actually opened up this, whoops, it opened up this terminal down here and it ran the tests on its own. So it kind of autonomously did this. One thing I will point out, if you're using an older version of VS Code, this process might be a little funky. Like I know I tested this on like an older version of VS Code and it didn't quite get it. It didn't quite integrate with the tasks. So if you are having issues there, then just upgrade VS Code. But you can take these tasks and you can tell Copilot to, do something like run the tests, and then it'll kind of do that automatically. Now, one thing I want to point out is a very important file in this repository, which is the Copilot instructions. So if you come up here to this .github folder, in the .github folder, we have this Copilot instructions file. This file is what's going to get read by Copilot every single time it does anything on the terminal. So you see here when I asked it to run the tests, it used two references. So it referenced this Copilot instructions.md file. That's here in the .github folder, Copilot instructions.md. This is a markdown file. I'm just going to preview it real quick. And you can see here right at the top, I said, whenever you're running scripts, always use VS Code tasks. And there's this tool called run tasks that Copilot will use. I told it to not use the npm run commands. Again, tasks are going to integrate better with VS Code. They're going to be a lot easier for Copilot to use and reason about and rerun and organize and all of that. So this is something that's worth adding to a Copilot instructions file. Again, this file it gets included in every request you make to Copilot. So anything that you put in here, Copilot will keep in mind. So I'm saying, use the task instead of using the npm run command. And then I just have some examples down here. So this is worth pointing out, like if you put something like this in your Copilot instructions file, it'll always use the tasks. If you don't have this, it might not necessarily do that. Okay, so the cool part about this is, at least for debugging, for managing your project, is Copilot can run all of these things, right? So if you notice here, I asked it to run the tests, and then it said all tests passed. It knew that 8 test suites and 17 tests completed. So Copilot is actually reading the output here from the terminal. So I could say again, like run the tests again and list out everything that's being tested. So you'll see what it does is it'll actually run the tests. So I click allow, it spawns the sort of process in this terminal. It runs through all of them. It's checking the output. Once they're done, then it should be able to read that output and get more info about it. Or in this case, it might run like an additional command to try and debug them more. You can see now it's looking through all the test files. So it knows how many test suites we have. It knows whether they passed or not. It's just able to kind of integrate all this information together a lot better. And so then what you could do then is, if some of these were failing, as we'll see later, you could have Copilot fix them. But it's just with tasks, it's a way of being able to automate these common things, these common tasks that you do in VS Code. All right, so why don't we run a couple more of these little commands? And if you're following along, you can just kind of play around, ask Copilot some different things. I'm going to just paste in some different little prompts that I have, and we'll just see. So another thing that we could do is have Copilot run the development server. So I could say here, start the development server and tell me what port it's running on. So we'll do that. So it's going to run the dev task. It'll run the dev server. It'll wait for that to load up. And then it should be able to tell us what port it's running on. Perfect. So we could run these different types of commands. There's another one here for resetting the database. So I could literally just say to Copilot, reset the database. I'm not specifying which task to use. It's a very general request. and then Copilot should look, find the correct task, and do that. So you can prompt Copilot using natural language, the way that you would normally talk to a developer, and it'll be able to infer, what tasks to do, and it can read the output of all of that. Okay, any questions on this so far? This is kind of the core thing that we're going to be doing for the rest of the workshop. Okay, awesome. Please feel free to interrupt me as well. I'm always happy to answer questions. Definitely adds to the teaching as well when I can field questions. Okay, so this is tasks. Again, play around with these. You can create custom tasks in here. Copilot can help you create tasks if you want to do like more complex scenarios. Another thing that I want to show you as well is, well, I guess, yeah, the first thing I'll show you is how Copilot can chain tasks together. So in this case, we have in this code base some end-to-end tests. So I just want to introduce these really quick. So the end-to-end tests, what they do is this is like a web app. So actually, you know what? Before we do that, why don't I show you all this web app so we get familiar with it? So I can run the dev server here, and this is kind of the app that we're going to be using. So we'll be like debugging things on. This is called Taskflow. You can take this and this localhost 3000, and you can just load this up directly in your browser. So Taskflow is like a task manager. You can just log in here and you can see we have like different tasks and different things. You can kind of like check these on and off, and they have different statuses. And there's like a Kanban board that we can drag and drop these things. So it's a basic task management app. So this is sort of the app that we're going to be debugging problems on. But again, it doesn't really matter that it's Taskflow. This can apply to pretty much any code base, and the tasks are kind of agnostic. It's more about like the developer environment than it is about the app. But what I have for this app here are some end-to-end tests. So the end-to-end tests will actually like spawn a browser, and then they'll actually like click through the browser and try to recreate different scenarios in the browser and then report back as to what happened. So these are more powerful than just those unit tests that we saw before. So if I want to run these end-to-end tests, I need to have the development server started here. And then in another terminal, I also need to run the end-to-end tests. So I could say like npm run test E to E, or you could run the task if you wanted. So I could say Command Shift P, tasks run task, and then this is test E to E. So we'll run this as a task. And like I said, this will load up like a browser. It does all of this in the background, but it'll load up a browser. It'll run through a bunch of different scenarios, and then they'll pass. But the important point here is that we need this development server running. So if I was to shut down this development server, let's see if we can get it to shut down here. So if I was to shut that down and then I was to rerun these end-to-end tests, they should fail because they're not connecting to the development server anymore. Hopefully that makes sense. That's kind of important for what we're going to be doing here. But in Copilot, I could, or sorry, in Copilot, I can have it do both of those things. So I can have it launch the dev server and then run the end-to-end tests once the dev server is loaded. So I'm just going to create a new kind of chat window here. It's always good to create a new window every once in a while. So I could say run the dev server and then the E to E's. So it's a very general command, but Copilot will be able to kind of, figure out that it needs to first run the dev server, then it needs to wait for it to load up. So it's checking the output, and all of this is dynamic. So even if it takes, 30 seconds to load up, Copilot can wait for it. So it knows it finished, and now it wants to run those end-to-end tests. So it'll run those, and you'll see it opens up a new terminal down here. So in that new terminal now it runs the end-to-end tests, and it's able to kind of orchestrate all of that together. If you don't use the VS Code tasks, it can't orchestrate it very well. So that's one of the reasons why the tests or the tasks are so useful. Okay, any questions on this? Just running tasks, chaining them together. Is everybody kind of following along here? I'm going to put a message in the chat. I'm following along if you're kind of with me here, and we can keep moving on. This is very core stuff though, so I want to make sure I address any questions. All right, we got a lot of thumbs up. That's looking good. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. One final thing I want to show you in this section is how we can take these tasks and take these things and combine them into reusable prompts. So if you notice down here, like I could have Copilot run the tests. I could say, run the tests, but I would have to type that in every time I want it to run the tests, right? I don't necessarily want to do that. What I can do is I can take these commands and I can put them into custom prompts. So this is all kind of built into VS Code, but if I come up here to GitHub, so there's this .github folder at the root directory. In the prompts subfolder, I have a bunch of different prompts. Now we're going to be looking at a lot of these prompts today to go through and debug these different situations, but you'll notice down here I have a couple. This one's called run.dev.prompt. This one's called run.test.prompt. The names here don't matter. You just need to have .prompt.md. So this can be whatever. But in a lot of cases, it's good to use these like dotted notation. So I could say like run, and then this is running the tests. So that would be a way of kind of indicating that. Now, when you have this file in the prompts folder, you can come down here to the Copilot chat and you type a forward slash, and then you can just type in the name of the prompt. So I could say run.task, or sorry, forward slash run.test. And then I just hit enter and then it'll follow that prompt. So you could put anything in here. You could say like run the test task, then observe the output and fix any bugs or something like that, right? Whatever you want to put in here, you can create these like custom sort of Copilot scripts that can be rerun very easily just using prompts. So that's something that I definitely recommend doing, and we're going to be looking at that a lot as we go through this workshop. Okay, so that is the first section done. Please stop me if you have any questions. So we talked about tasks, we talked about chaining them together, and then we talked about reusable prompts. And by the way, this is our Bitovi, our little mascot. It's just like this little egg. So Bitovi, it's like bit, OV is like egg. So that's kind of like fun little Easter egg there for all of you. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is debugging when things break. So far we've talked about how do we manage the different tasks in the app using Copilot, right? Running the tests, we could run the linter, we could run the dev server, we could build thing, you could build the app, whatever you need to do. Even if you have complex things for like deploying, you could run CI scripts and all this stuff. All of it can be automated with tasks and with Copilot. But what happens when things break? So now we're going to talk about a very important part of the debugging process, which is having Copilot fix like broken tests, broken linting errors, things like that. So broken builds, like it'll kind of fix all of this. Now, if you're following along with me, we're going to need to check out another branch here on Taskflow. I just want to show you real quick how this is set up. So if you go back to the Taskflow GitHub repository, and I'll link to this again for all of you in the chat. You can see here, I just kind of updated this as well. So if you, I will say this, if you downloaded Taskflow like yesterday, I should have mentioned this before. If you downloaded it like yesterday, you definitely want to reclone it down because I did make some changes this morning, just some quality of life changes. But so yeah, hopefully no one had any problems with that. But yeah, make sure you have the latest version of Taskflow. So if you need to reclone that, reclone that. But then you'll see we have a few different branches here. I have debug 1, debug 2, and debug 3. We're going to be walking through each one of these branches today, and they all have different debugging scenarios that we can look at. So over here in Git, we're just going to say git switch, and then we're going to say debug 1. Now, if you made changes here, then it's like it might not let you switch, so you might need to like reset those changes. I have something here for how to do that. So down here, if you look, it says check out the debug 1 branch. If you have any changes, make sure you either commit them or you reset them and just move on to the next branch. So hopefully no one has any problems there. But now we're on the debug 1 branch, okay? So on the debug 1 branch, there are some problems that we need Copilot to fix for us. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to have Copilot try to run the dev server. So over here in the chat window, let's have Copilot do that. So we're just going to say run the dev server. Now it's going to try to run the dev server and we'll see what it does. So it's going to ask us to run the task. And it's starting up. But you'll see here, we actually got an error. So there's a problem here. This is a very common situation, right? You try to run the build or you try to run the dev server. There's some weird problem. You get this kind of crazy syntax here. There's a bunch of red. And you'll notice that it output the error here in the terminal. So because it output the error in the terminal, Copilot was actually able to read that and it figured out, oh, there's a syntax error here. So I didn't tell it to fix the syntax error. I didn't tell it that there was going to be an error. It just ran the dev server. It noticed, hey, it failed, intelligently on its own. And then it said, okay, well, I need to fix this. So there's a syntax error in the dashboard page, the variable task stats being declared twice. It understands what happened. And then it'll go over to the relevant file. So you can see here, it went over to the file and it fixed the issue. So it was something related to this. Oh yeah, here we go. So task stats was being declared twice. So now it's only being declared once, and then we got rid of something else. But you'll notice we keep getting these errors. So if you come back over to the app, there's actually kind of a lot of errors that are showing up here. So, well, let me see here. There was a couple other ones. Um, so let me stop this really quick. So once again, just to kind of reiterate that point, right? So Copilot ran the dev server. There was an error. It fixed the error, and then it tried to run the dev server again. Now, in this case, there's actually a lot of errors in this code base. So if we tried to run the dev server again, so I'm just going to do this, npm run dev. If we try to run this again, I'm guessing there's going to be another error as well. There's a lot of errors, a lot of things that are kind of going wrong here that are problematic. Okay, I guess there wasn't one. So Copilot might have fixed that. But if we run the linter, we'll find that there's a lot of things that are wrong. So I'm going to run the linting task. So you can just hit Command-Shift-P, run task, and then we're going to run this linting task. For those of you who don't know, the linter is just going to look through the code and find like structural problems or things that are just kind of not necessarily going to break the code, but that aren't like consistent or in line with the correct styling. So we can run the linter. And you'll see here that we have a lot of problems with the linter. So there's all these different warnings that get spit out, and a lot of them have, actual line numbers. It says exactly what the problem is. So this is a perfect situation where Copilot can try to fix these, right? So before we just ran the dev server, Copilot fixed a couple of the errors that were popping up, but there's actually more things that are wrong here. So what I could do is I can come back over here to Copilot, and I'm going to create a new little agent window. And so yeah, we can just keep that and continue. And then we're going to say, hey, I want you to fix the linting errors. So all I have to do is just say, hey, Copilot, fix these linting errors. And what it should do is run the linter. And then it'll, that will output all the different things that are going wrong. Or maybe it's just trying to check it manually. Hold on. Sometimes these things are too smart for their own good. So we could say run the linter and fix any errors. Okay, so it's going to run the lint task. Now, Copilot could have just gone and tried to do it all on its own, but it's better if we have it run the linter because then it'll know exactly what's wrong. So it runs that. It all shows up here in the terminal. Copilot's then able to read that output from the terminal. And again, because there's all of these like detailed messages about where the problems are and all these things, it can use that. Now, sometimes it'll also want to run an npm command, especially if there's a lot of output down here. It won't, because of the way the tasks work with the tools, it won't always be able to read all of it sometimes. I think that's probably going to get fixed in later versions, but sometimes it'll want to run like another npm command, so you should just let it do that. And so now it knows what all the linting errors are, and it's going to go through step by step and try to fix them. Now, what this is going to put us into is a sort of debugging cycle. And so, yeah, we can let it run these commands. So anytime it wants to run, like in this case, it's just trying to like run the linter against specific things. So you can just let it run those kind of individual commands. But what it'll do now, you can see it like fixes the issues and then it'll try to rerun the linter It'll fix more of the issues. It'll try to rerun. What we're essentially doing here is we're falling into this debug loop. So it's a fail, fix, retry loop. So we run the tests or we run the linter, and then there's failures. Copilot tries to fix them, it applies the changes, and then it runs them again, and then it sees, okay, did I fix all of them? If not, I'm going to go back and keep fixing them. So this is the core debugging loop that's involved here in VS Code with Copilot. It's you run a command, Copilot gets the output of that command, it uses the information from that output to make changes, it runs the command again, and then it can kind of hopefully fix everything. And so all we had to do here was just say run the linter and fix any errors. And it's now kind of off to the races. It's going to be able to hopefully do that for us. And so from the kind of Copilot interface here, you can click through all of these different files. You can see exactly the changes that it's making or the files that it's reading. And I can just kind of click through those here using this little click thing. So normally you'd have to go through and like individually fix all of these, but with Copilot, it can just do it easily because again, it has like very specific information about, what file it's in, where in the file it is, what the exact problem is. So you can see here, it tried to fix everything. And now it's trying to run the linter one last time to make sure that everything got fixed. So we're going to allow that. And it runs them again. So there's just one additional problem here that's left. So it'll try to fix that, and then hopefully we'll have everything passing. So once again, this is kind of the main cycle for debugging. And this is how you want to think about things when you're debugging with Copilot is run a command, get the output. Copilot reads the output, suggests a fix, and then you run the same command again. It applies to everything, linting, testing, anything. And so now we're going to run the linter for the last time. You can see over here. And all of these should be fixed. Cool. All right, real quick, I just want to check in with everybody. So if you're doing good, leave a thumbs up on that message, or if you're having issues, leave a thumbs up on this message. I'm happy to field questions if anyone has anything. But hopefully this is making sense, right? This kind of loop that we're getting into with Copilot where it's able to fix things. Okay, cool. So it looks like people are doing pretty good. So now all the linting errors are fixed. I'm going to run npm run lint. And yeah, it looks like we have 0 warnings, so we're good. So just within 5 minutes, Copilot fixed all those linter errors that would have taken us probably an hour to do without it. So that's pretty cool. Now, another thing that we can have Copilot do is try to fix failing tests. It's a very similar idea, but I want to introduce another layer to this. So if we run the tests, like the unit tests, and I'm just going to have Copilot do that. So I'm going to open up a new little window here. I'll just say run the unit. Or no, actually, we have a prompt for this. So I could say run dot test. So once again, to run those custom prompts, it's a / and then just the name of the prompt. And those prompts are up here in the .github folder, in the prompts subfolder. And then I have them down here. So we can have Copilot run the tests. And then we'll see there should be some failures here. Yeah, so it looks like a lot of these tests failed. So we had 5 failures out of 14. It's not great. And Copilot should pick up on that. So the tests ran, but 4 tests failed. And now it's asking us, like, do you want me to investigate these? Sometimes it'll just go off and try to fix them on its own. One thing I want to show all of you, though, is a way of being able to debug tests or really anything that allows you to get maximum kind of efficiency and effectiveness out of it. So let me show you real quick. Up here in the prompts folder, so once again, .github prompts, and then we have all these different prompts. I have one here which is called fix tests. So this is a custom prompt that I wrote. I can run this down here in the terminal by just saying fix tests. But I want to just talk through what this is doing real quick. So we'll just take a look at this. So it's in the same spirit of this cycle. So we run the tests fail, Copilot suggests a fix, we apply the changes, and then we repeat. So this is the core debugging loop. So I have this markdown file. I'm just going to preview it. You can open the preview here. And let's take a look at what this does. So this is a prompt, right? It's a prompt that we're going to feed into Copilot. We're telling it to do something. It's a debugging prompt. So it's called fix failing tests. We're telling it, okay, you're fixing failing tests, run the tests, identify the failures, and fix them one at a time. I'm also reminding it to use the VS Code tasks. Okay, that's again very important when we're doing this. Better to have it use the tasks because it's more built in with Copilot. And we're going to have it follow a process. So before, when I was doing the linting, I just said, run the linter and fix the issues, right? Something like this. It's very general, and it worked, right? Copilot was able to do that. But we can structure this a little bit better, especially if you're running complex unit tests or some type of test that isn't just as straightforward as fixing a linting error. A lot of times it helps to have Copilot follow a predefined process. So in this case, we're defining the process up here. We're saying for each failing test, I want you to identify the test file, the test name, which assertion failed, and the error message. So we're kind of going through and we're having Copilot kind of capture all of the information about the test that's failing. So we're saying, okay, if this test failed, tell me what the file name is, what's the name of the test, what was the actual assertion that failed, and then what was the error message. And Copilot can get all of that from, this, right? So if you or I is reading this, this is very confusing, right? I don't necessarily know at a glance what's wrong here, but Copilot can read through all of this and understand it. Like, all this like TypeScript stuff, it's very difficult to understand, but Copilot can understand it. So in this process, we're saying, all right, for each failing test, go through and like parse out all this information, and then in plain English, explain what went wrong and why, and then identify the root cause, make the fix, and then rerun the test. And if it passes, then move on. So when we run the test for each one of these failures, for this one, Copilot's going to follow this process. So it'll identify the test, explain it, identify the cause, make the change, and then rerun it. It'll do all of this continuously. So why don't we just take a look at how this works here, and then I'll explain a little bit more. So down here in Copilot, and if you want, start up a new agent window. It's always a good idea. So I'm going to run /, and we can say fix tests. And then I'm just going to hit enter. So when I hit enter, it'll feed this prompt into Copilot. And you'll notice down here, I have some sample output. Like this is what I want it to kind of output for me, but we'll see what that looks like in a second. So we're going to run the fix test prompt. The first thing it'll do is run all of the tests using a task. And again, with these, if you want to kind of always allow it, that's fine. For the purposes of the demo, I'm just going to be allowing them individually. So Copilot runs all the tests. It reads all of the console output. So it's able to say, okay, here's everything that happened, everything that went wrong. It's checking the output. And then it also sometimes might run like an additional test command. In this case, it's running it like verbosely. You can just allow it to do that as well. All right, so now it sees the failures and it's going to create a to-do list to track the fixes. So we can look at the to-do list down here, and it's basically just fix each test one by one. Now I want you to notice what's showing up here. So Copilot is following the process that we outlined in the prompt. So in this prompt, once again, .github folder, in the prompts folder, in the fixtests.prompt file. So this is the process that we outlined, and Copilot is following that. So this was the first test that failed. Maybe we can see that up here. Yeah, it's hard to see, but the first one was there was some weird utility with double spaces. So it's outlining, okay, here's the test file. We can click on that. Here's the failing assertion. So we can kind of go there. The observed failure message, and then it's giving us a high-level description of what went wrong, and then kind of identifying the root cause and why it fails, and then here's the fix that it applied. So the reason that it's good to do this, there's a couple reasons. One is because it gives you as the developer more insight into what's happening. You saw with the linter, I just kind of ran it. I was just like, run the linter and then fix any problems that show up, right? But in the case of these unit tests, like we might want to track, okay, what did you actually fix, right? If the linting errors go away, it's like, okay, it's probably fine, right? But how do we know Copilot didn't mess around with the test? How do we know it didn't misinterpret the test? How do we know something didn't go wrong, right? So for the sake of the developer, it's good for you to be able to go through and just at a glance kind of read, okay, here's what happened, here's the description. And then you're like, let me click through some of these files. Okay, I see what you did there, and then here's the fix that you applied, and then you're like, okay, that looks good. So you as a developer can go through and confirm everything, which is really nice. Another thing that's good as well is when Copilot does this, when it outputs all of this information, it actually helps Copilot. So it forces Copilot to think through, like, okay, here's what's wrong. Let me describe it. Here's the files that I've looked in. And then it can use all of that information, that investigation as context. So it actually helps fix the bugs a lot better. So there's a lot of good reasons to do this. And it is as simple as just having a script, right? We had this fix tests prompt, and we just outlined like a very simple process for Copilot. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and just let it continue doing this, and hopefully, if you're following along, you've kind of moved on from here. But so now it's had all the tests in this library pass. So what it'll do is it'll run the next round of tests and it'll try to fix those. So we can just kind of watch it go here. Any questions? Anything anyone want to bring up?
Yeah, I have a quick question and
Yep.
maybe it's just a comment. I only had a limited number of um what do you call them? Like chat bots to use, right? I only had like GPT-5 mini and a
Yeah.
couple other options. And so far they seem to have been choking on
Mhm.
the like more agentic stuff we've been going over at the end here. They just
Yeah.
like keep running and running and running. And then it even prompts me. It's like, hey, this is taking a while. Do you want to maybe refine your prompt? I'm wondering if
Yeah.
that's common.
It's definitely common. So the one unfortunate thing here is depending on the intelligence level of the model, it won't always follow this. So one thing I've found kind of I think what you're discovering is if you use one of these kind of smaller models like GPT-5 mini or 4.1, it won't want to follow along exactly with what the prompt says. So in this case, we outlined this whole like process. A lot of times I found they just skip right past it and they're like, okay, I'm just gonna kind of follow this. They don't take it as being as important. Is that kind of what you discovered?
I think so. It's kind of hard to follow
Yeah.
exactly what it was doing, but it just didn't seem to be getting anywhere productive.
Okay, yeah. So I think in that case, it definitely has to do with the model. So if that's all you have is those models, one thing that you could do is just play around with the prompt. So you might need to outline like, hey, this one specific test is failing. Maybe you can go into the terminal here and like you could even just kind of copy all of this, paste this in, and be like, you know, oh, whoops. So you could just be like, this specifically is failing, you know, try to fix it. So you might need to individually have it address each one of these. It might not be able to handle the whole like looping thing. It's definitely an issue that I've found with some of these models. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no. Really, really good to know. At least try one of the better models before
Yeah.
spending a lot of time, I think.
Yeah, or like I said, if you can just kind of make the ask a little bit more concise, it's not so open-ended, then I think they'll probably end up doing a little better.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey,
Yep.
I joined a little late, but I see you have like five prompts, right?
Yeah.
Separate prompts.
Mhm.
And how do you make sure that they are immediately going to be inside of your context, right? So usually,
Mhm.
like I go to whatever my unit test, right, that fails,
Yeah.
like you do npx jest, blah blah blah, and say sorry, it fails, right?
Yeah.
How you make sure that they all those prompts inside of your context window?
Great question. So all of it has to do with this little chat box down here. So if you want to access one of the prompts, you can, well, actually, there's two ways you can do this. So the first way allows you to add like multiple prompts. So you can click on this add context button right here, and then you could search for, let me see if we can find the prompts. Yeah, so you can search for your different prompts. So maybe I wanted the fix bugs prompt to be in here, and then I can click back on this little paperclip, and then we could find another one. So you could add this as well. So now both of these would be in the context window. You can also drag and drop them. So I could just drag this, drop it into here, drag this, and now
Yeah,
they'll be in there. Another
yeah,
thing,
I
yeah,
don't. Yeah, I do that. I don't like it. I want it automatic for me for whenever I do tests. So I don't have to drag and drop all those context.
yeah. So then another thing you could do, and this, I think this should work, is let's say you have like this run test prompt, right? In here, you could say, I don't know how we would phrase this. You might say like use the prompt in, and then you could say like I don't know, yeah, fix test.prompt.md to fix any failing test, and then you could say use the prompt.
Ah,
And so this will probably work. This is also going to depend on the agent whether this works or not. Some of them are going to be able to do this better than others, but if you just, kind of soft link them in this prompt, then down here, all you'd have to run would be run.test, and then it would be able to do all of that. Yeah,
right.
definitely something to play around with. But like I said, probably going to be dependent on the agent in a lot of cases.
Oh, but
Uh,
by the way, responding to the previous question, right? Like you should absolutely get the later version of the models. If you're using those cheap free models that it comes with Copilot, you're gonna be miserable. Just
yeah,
something that.
I agree. Yeah.
Uh, can't you put the can't you put all that you were putting it in run test prompt?
Yeah,
Can't you put it in Copilot instructions?
absolutely. Yeah. So
Then it
you could, yeah. So it just depends on where you want it to live. Like so Copilot instructions, this is going to run for every prompt. So
Right.
every time you send a message to Copilot, it's going to run all of this. So
Okay.
if you want that to be in context for every single thing, that's totally a great place to put it. In this case, it would just be a little bit more targeted where you could control exactly how that happens. Yeah.
Okay. I guess what I was saying is that you could in Copilot instructions be like, okay, first figure out if it's one of these things.
Yeah.
Are we debugging? Are we finding
Mhm.
bugs? Are we fixing tests? And then, you could say, I'm going to tell you like what did I say? Like fix tests, like you know what I'm saying? And
Mhm.
then like here and then if so, follow the yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
100%. Yeah. So then here we could put like testing instructions. If we're yeah, fixing tests, here's this. So Copilot can kind of do all this for me. Yeah, so absolutely, this would be great. And then in here, you could include links to prompts. So you could say use ./GitHub /prompts, etc. to run the test. So all of that could be wired up in Copilot instructions, and you would have this sort of case statement, if this, then this, or whatever, that would allow you to route Copilot appropriately. Yeah, great point. Any additional questions? So it's kind of finishing up here with running my test, so I'm just going to allow this. Cool. So all my tests have passed and now we're looking good. So once again, and please interrupt me if you have questions. This is the core debugging loop that we're running through with Copilot. This is where you get that sort of 5x, right? This is where we're 5 times faster. It's because Copilot can do all of this if we have an appropriately intelligent agent behind us, right? Run the tests. If they fail, suggest a fix, apply the changes, run the tests again. We just showed that whole process here. And in this case, I have a custom prompt called the fix test prompt that outlines a nice little template that it can follow. That's good for us because we can see what's going on. It's good for Copilot because Copilot's able to reason through this in a very structured way. It helps to fix the bugs. So that's kind of the core there. All right, so now we should just be able to run the app. I'm just going to run npm run dev, or we could have Copilot do it, and then all the errors should be fixed, hopefully. Yeah, it looks good. Cool. Also, another thing I'll point out real quick. This is actually they just added this like 2 or 3 days ago. I saw. So you can add elements to the chat. So you could like select different things from this little browser and then they get added into the chat. Another cool thing for debugging, if something's broken, you can just kind of select it and it'll get added here as context. So I don't know exactly everything that you can do with that because it is very new, but it's pretty cool. All right, so if there's no more
What
questions,
is that?
yeah.
What's that thing? What's that browser again?
Yeah, that's the simple browser. I don't know how we pull it up. I can't see that. Yeah, simple browser. So if you do, okay, there we go. Yeah, so Command Shift P, simple browser show. So yeah, then you just put like localhost 3000. This is a browser that's built into VS Code. It's very simple. It's not very powerful at all, but you can do basic things and it looks like they're starting to kind of integrate it. I don't know why this isn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know I was here late. I like my calendar program wasn't on, so sorry about that.
No, no worries. It's all being recorded, so I'll send you a copy of the recording afterwards. But yeah, so then and then here, I don't know why it's not. This is very new, so it's kind of flaky, but yeah. Okay, any other questions? And then we'll move on. We have a couple more sections that we can get through here. Looks like we have about an hour left. All right, very cool. So we're gonna check out another branch and let's go over here. So once again, I have this little one sheet. I'm gonna share this in the chat for anyone following along. Whoops. And we're moving on to so we just fixed the linting errors in the tests. Now we're going to debug full stack bugs. So now we're talking about client server, right? This is a very common pattern in web development and anything, right? You have some sort of you have one environment that's calling out to another environment and they're trying to synchronize data, right? So the user clicks on something that gets sent to the server to be processed and then the server sends me something back. These are very complex debugging scenarios, right? Because I need to know what happened in the client. I need to know what happened in the server. I need to know how the communication is happening between the two things. It's very complex. That's what we're going to talk about here. So we have this debug2 branch. So we're going to switch over to that and git. Now, again, if you have like changes here, so you can try to just git switch. So you could say git switch debug2. And that's going to switch us over to the debug2 branch, if I can spell it right. But you'll see it's like, hey, commit your changes. So you can either commit them. So, git add dot git commit and then fix tests. And you can push it or not. I'm not going to push it. Or you can just say git reset hard head. Actually, you guys probably won't be able to push because you don't have ownership of the repo. But okay, so now we're on so you can say git branch, we're on debug. Oh no, sorry. So now we can say git switch debug2. And all of those instructions are right here. If anyone has any issues with that, just let me know. So you want to make sure you're on the debug2 branch. So you can just say git branch debug2. Let's open up a new little chat window here and we're going to take a look at what's going on. So first things first, let's take a look at the error that we have. So there is an error in the code base, and we're going to try to debug it with Copilot, but let's look at what the error is first. So let's ask Copilot to run the dev server. And it'll start up the dev server for us. And once again, if you want to open this in your like Chrome browser, I recommend that because the little simple browser here is pretty bad. So I want to show you the problem that's happening. This is the bug. So we'll log in and then over here in tasks. So let's see what's wrong. So I want you to notice this guy right here, create automated workflow systems. So this is just like a task that's assigned to George Wilson and it has a like a status. So it's in review right now. And then it has a priority, which is high. Now watch what happens. So when I select this checkbox, it'll turn it to done. So this will mean that we've completed it, right? So it'll get turned to done. But I want you to see what happens over here. It's going to change the priority. So if I click this, you'll see after it comes back and it changes done, it changes it to low. So I didn't want to do that, right? Just because I change or just because I check something off here, it doesn't mean that the priority should change necessarily. At least that's the bug in this situation. So you notice here, like this is to do. If I mark it as done, the status changes, right? Or the priority changes. Now in this case, it's already low, so it wouldn't change. But in this case, again, like if I change it to done, it changes the priority to low. Any questions on that? So this is, as long as you understand that that's kind of a bug, then that's all we need to know here to to try and debug it. All right, so all of that is described in a file down here, which is called, let me see, bug report. So here, this bug report file, this is a markdown file. So we'll just preview it. And this is like, imagine someone filed a bug report for the code base, or think of like a GitHub issue, something like that, right? So just any kind of bug. So it's just describing exactly what happened, right? And this is really important. Like if you have a bug like this and you want Copilot to be able to fix it, the better you can explain it, the better Copilot will do. So you can see here, like I have a nice summary, and then there's a really good description. We also have steps to reproduce it. This is really important. Again, the more we can map out, like, here's exactly how you recreate this bug, Copilot can go and kind of follow along with that. We also have like what's the expected behavior, what's the actual behavior. Here's some visual evidence, so additional context. You might not need all of this, but the more we have, the better. So this is an example of a document that we could feed into Copilot, and Copilot would be able to fix this bug for us. Now, before we do that, I want to talk about kind of, because this is an interesting scenario in terms of debugging. So we're debugging a client and a server issue. So once again, let me kind of let me show what's happening here. So it's very clearly a like something to do with the client and the server, right? I click this checkbox, and you'll notice down here the status changes, and then like I don't know, a second later, this priority changes. So it goes to the server, and then it comes back to the client, and then a second later, something changes there. So it's very clearly like a multi-environment issue, right? We call the server, we get the response back, but then something happens where they're just not in sync anymore, right? Or there's some delayed server call. Something's going on across the different environments. So that's kind of the idea here, is that we want to be able to debug situations like that, or just more complex situations than we would have in a unit test. So in this case, we have the browser, which has console logs, it has network calls, and then we have the server, which has its own kind of logs, right? So the browser logs, those might be able to tell us what's going on in the browser. Server logs can tell us what's going on in the server. And then if we combine all of those together, Copilot will be able to understand what's happening. So the goal here is to be able to take the server logs, take the browser logs, combine them together, and then feed them into Copilot. And then Copilot can read through the transaction that's taking place between the server and the client. So Copilot can see, okay, here's what happened on the client, and then it made the request to the server. The server got this data, the server did this, and then the server sent this back, and then the client did this. So it can track exactly what's happening across these different environments. It's very important. And that's what I want to demonstrate here. Now, this is a little bit more of an advanced use case, and it's also going to depend on how you have your environment set up. So I want to show you how we're set up here in Taskflow, but depending on how you're like running your app, like if you're running a web app, or if depending on the server that you're running, this is going to be a little bit different. So you might need to kind of adapt this to your own situation, but in this case, I have like an example workflow that we can look at. So the first thing I want to do is just point out how we might test these types of issues. So this is where the end-to-end tests come in. So I have here, if you look in this test folder, we have the unit tests, and we just showed how we can debug those with that simple loop, that script. But then we also have these end-to-end tests. Now these tests are a little bit more complex. So what these will do is they'll actually load up a browser, and then they'll go through and like click through the browser and they'll check like what's happening in the browser. They'll be able to look for things. You can see here it's like filling in this input with an email. It's filling in the password. It's checking to see if there's like a login button, and then we have one here for the tasks where it's like going to this tasks page and it's inputting into the title. So hopefully a lot of you are familiar with these types of tests, but the basic idea here is that it's a more complex test that is executing things on both the client and the server. So we need the client running and we need the server running. And as the test is clicking around, it's making requests to the server, it's coming back to the client. So this is a more complex environment where we're going to be able to run debugging scenarios. All right, so then just real quick, I showed you this a little bit earlier in the presentation, but just to demonstrate how to run the end-to-end tests. So the first thing that we'd want to do would be to run the dev server. So I could say npm run dev. So this will load up the dev server, and then I can create a new terminal. And then here I can say npm run test :e to e. So these are those end-to-end tests. So I could run those. And actually, to keep this kind of in line with Copilot, why don't I have Copilot do this? So we can say to Copilot, run the dev server, and then the E to E's. So now Copilot's going to do this. So again, this is how we might test things in this multi-system environment, right? Where we have the client and then we have the server. We can use these kind of end-to-end tests as a way of being able to, run the test the way it's intended to be run by clicking around, by hitting the server, all that. So Copilot runs the dev server in one terminal, and then it opens up another terminal and it runs all of the end-to-end tests. All right, any questions on this so far, like the basic workflow here?
Is this following one of your prompts at all, or is this just like running raw here?
Running raw for now, and then we are going to be running a prompt as well. Yeah. But you'll notice here I did prompt Copilot to run the dev server and the E2E. So it is sort of following a prompt, yeah. Okay, cool. So now what I want to do is talk about the basic strategy here. So we want Copilot to be able to sort of go in here and replicate this issue as it happens. So we want Copilot essentially to be able to come in here and, click on one of these, and then now the server's not running, but whoops. Copilot should be able to click on one of these and what is this? I don't know what that is. Oh, there we go. Okay. But yeah, anyway, we wanted to be able to click on one of these and like replicate the problem. Let me see here. Yeah. So let's talk about how that would work. Now, I have a custom prompt here. Before I do that, I'm going to reset the database. So if you're clicking around there in Taskflow, you could just say npm run db reset. That'll kind of reset everything. And up here in the .github folder, we have another prompt, which is called Debug-With-Logs. So the idea here is that we want to be able to run these end-to-end tests in a way where we can see all of the server logs and all of the browser logs in the same environment, right? And then Copilot can look through and it can see like, okay, the server is communicating with the client in this way, and then the client calls back to the server, etc. So we can track that communication that's happening. Now, another thing I want to explain here is I have a custom script that kind of does this. So again, depending on your coding environment, you might need to set this up kind of manually, but I just want to show you the main sort of idea here, and then we can get this running. So I'm using something called Playwright to run these end-to-end tests. So I've sort of set up Playwright in a very custom way where when it's running these tests, it'll take the console output and it'll sort of pipe it into the terminal. And then it'll take the server output and pipe that into the terminal. And I have a custom script here in this scripts folder called test E to E with server. So we can just look at this real quick. But if you're doing something like this, you're going to need some sort of a script that can run the server and the client at the same time and be able to have those logs come into one environment. I hope this is making sense. If it's not, please let me know, and we'll see more about how this works in a second. But just know that we have this custom script here that will run the server and it'll run the client together, and then it'll sort of output everything in one environment. And that's what I'm running. So I have a custom task up here. So in the VS Code folder, tasks.json, there's this task here, which is called test e colon debug. And it just runs this npm command. And if we go down here to the npm command, it's basically running this custom script. So if you want to come back into Taskflow and take a look at that script or have Copilot analyze it for you, there's a lot of good information in there to help you kind of replicate this. For now, I'm just going to point out that I have a custom script here. What it does is it runs the server and it runs the client. So it runs like the playwright tests and it pipes all the logs together. Again, you can just have Copilot analyze that file for you and it'll be able to explain it a lot better after the workshop. So let's just take a look and run this real quick. So what this will do is I can say npm run test e colon debug. So for those that are following along, you can just type that out, or you could just ask Copilot run the e in debug mode. So I'll run this. Yeah, was there a question?
Why can't it like watch two separate things? Like, why can't it watch two separate things, or can it, or can't it?
It's something that I think they'll add in later. For right now, it's very bad at doing that. Yeah, generally it can run one thing and then let that run in the background and then move on to another thing, but it's not good at managing like two terminals. Okay, this one's running, this one's running. I suspect probably even within the course of a few months, it might be able to do that. Right now, though, you still need kind of a custom script. Yeah. So hopefully this part is kind of outdated in the near future, but for now, you do need to kind of orchestrate all of this, unfortunately. So you'll notice here, like, again, I ran this script. It runs the server and the client at the same time. And I've labeled all the different outputs. So we have here, this is like the orchestration script. So this is my script that I wrote. And then we have all the server logs. And then there's probably some, yeah, it doesn't look like there's too many browser logs in here just yet. But we're going to add those in. So the idea is that Copilot is going to try to fix this issue and it'll add logs in the server and in the client. And then it'll kind of use that to debug the issue. Okay. I know this is a lot of information. It's nice to have it on the recording so you all can go back later and watch it. But any intermediate questions before we move on? Okay, cool. So then the last step is just going to be to run this prompt that I have. And then we can move on because this section it's a little bit heavy, but I just wanted to introduce this concept of okay, how could we technically debug a big issue across different environments? You need, at least for now, you need something like this. A script, or there's like a package called concurrently. There's another one called like run e with tests. You need something that can combine and run all of these at the same time. So let's go over into our .github folder into prompts, and then I have this Debug-With-Logs prompt. So I'm just going to read through this really quick, and then we'll kick it off, and then we can kind of move on once that gets going. So let's preview this. And you'll see here, it basically says, okay, so we can pass in a file. So I'll show you how this works in a second, but we can specify a file and we say you're debugging a bug reported in that file. Follow these steps. We're telling it to use the VS Code tasks. So I'm basically saying, okay, read the bug report, which is a file that gets passed in, and we'll see how that works in a second. So read the bug report, find the code that's find the code that's probably involved in that, and then add logging. So we're going to add console logs to trace the data flow throughout the app. So we'll add logs to we'll add logs to the browser, we'll add logs to the server, and all of those this is like a Next.js app, so those are kind of all here in the same file system. But Copilot will add logs to the server and the client, and it'll identify them with this little bug emoji. And then it'll run that custom test script. And it might even write its own test if there isn't one that's covering this scenario. and then it'll just kind of clean everything up. So let's go ahead and run this. I know this is a lot, but I just wanted to kind of introduce it. So let's just run this script and we'll see what happens. So I'm going to do / and we'll say debug with logs. And I want to pass in the file name. So you'll see up here, it's expecting us to pass in a file. This is like a prompt parameter. So this is kind of an easy way to do that. So we could just say file is equal to, and it's just bug report. So this bug report file, we kind of looked at that before. So I'm passing that in. So Copilot is going to read that bug report, and then it'll try to figure out the code that's involved. It'll add logging, and then it'll run the tests and read the logs across the different environments. So understand the bug. It's clear. Now it's going to just do a cursory pass, try to find the code that's involved. So it thinks it found the issue on line 56. Now, if you have a simple issue, Copilot might just be able to find it and fix it right away. But if you have complex issues, then a lot of times you will need logs. So it's just kind of your mileage may vary. But this is definitely a more advanced scenario. So Copilot thinks it found the bug. It identified some code that it thinks is problematic. Now what it's going to do is add logging. So it'll add debug logs to trace the data flow. So this is a really key part here. Copilot's going to add console logs into the code, and then it will actually run the code and it'll read those logs to determine what's happening in the different environments. So if I click here, you can see it's adding some console log statements. This is to like the client, and then here on the action, it's adding in console logs. So Copilot will be able to trace, okay, here's the data that gets sent to the server, and then over here, here's what the server receives, and then here's how the server processes it, and then we can see what happens when it goes back to the client. So it'll give Copilot enough information to be able to hopefully debug this. And again, in a simple scenario, like it might just be able to fix the issue, but the more complex of an issue that you have, the more you have to kind of, orchestrate things like this. So we're going to run that same debugging script. And now Copilot's going to read all of this output as it runs. Hopefully, sometimes this can be a little flaky, but we're going to see what happens. So it's running all of these end-to-end tests. And we should see the browser and the server logs in here that Copilot added. Okay, actually, sorry. So we don't have a test that's testing this yet. So Copilot's going to actually add a test here for this. So you can see, I don't see a test for the checkbox toggle functionality. Let me write a test to reproduce it. I know this is a lot. Hopefully you're all following along. If you have any questions, please stop me. But again, just the basic flow here. So Copilot tries to understand the bug. It finds the code that it thinks is involved. It adds detailed logging to the client and the server. So we have these detailed console logs, and then it runs the existing tests. So it runs the end-to-end tests that are already in the library, and it'll try to see like, okay, did these end-to-end tests like test this bug? Was there an end-to-end test that, tested out this functionality that we can see as failing? In this case, it didn't find one. So it's going to write its own test to reproduce the bug. So it wrote the test here. This is a custom test to toggle the task completion. And then we'll let it run that test. And then hopefully we should see the logs. Sometimes the tests will fail because end-to-end tests are difficult to write. So Copilot will kind of mess it up the first time. So let's see what happens here. But yeah, I know this is a lot. So hopefully you're all following along. So this is the test that Copilot just wrote. And the test wasn't written quite up to snuff. It didn't quite test everything that we needed to test. So Copilot's going to go rewrite the test, and then it'll try to run it again. So it's following this. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, Mike. I had a quick question because I was considering changing my model based on what somebody else was saying. I was having similar issues. Will that change, like the historical chat that you had prompts with your agent?
It shouldn't. As long as
it'll pick up.
Yeah,
Okay.
it'll pick up. As long as you're in the same chat window here, then it'll have the same context. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks. Sorry for interrupting.
No worries. Please interrupt anyone with questions. All right, so once again, Copilot created a new test. It tried to run the test failed because there was an issue, like it didn't write the test correctly. End-to-end tests are hard to write. So it's going to try to run the test again, and then we'll see if we can get those console logs up here. Cool. So let's take a look here. So Copilot ran this test, and you can see here we have these different logs. So we have the browser log here. It's giving us a bunch of information. So we have like the original priority, which was high, the target status, which was done, and the target or the task metadata. And this was from the browser, right? So Copilot can see what's going on in the browser, and then it can see, okay, here's what the server got. So here's the information that went to the server, right? And then down here, there's more information from the server, and then the test fails. So now Copilot has a detailed, like step-by-step log of what actually happened as it was running in this multi-environment setup. And again, I needed to use a custom script that ran the server and the client in this same kind of terminal. And once again, if you're interested in how that works, just ask Copilot to analyze the code base. It'll be able to walk you through step by step what I did. It's pretty simple to replicate. But here again, the goal is that we have the browser logs and then we can see the server logs right after them. You'll notice I used this little bug icon that's just so Copilot can recognize them. Cool. So it says, all right, so the logs clearly show that the priority starts as high, but after the normalization logic, it's changed to low. And now it can confirm, okay, here's the code that was problematic. And so now it'll fix the bug. So it can delete the code up here, and then we'll just have it run that test again. Cool. So hopefully both of these pass and then we can move on. I know that this section's a lot. It's definitely a lot, but I wanted to include this in here because this is the most powerful debugging method I think that we have with Copilot is being able to debug multi-environment setups, which, like I said, at least for now, generally will require a custom kind of orchestration script. You need something that can kind of combine all these logs together into one place. But I think probably in 6 months that might be different.
It doesn't access debug data, does it?
In debug data in what context? Like from
Like
Chrome?
like a debugger. Like
I think it probably could. As long as it's running in the terminal and it's using these tasks, generally it's able to find things. I haven't tested it specifically with debuggers. Most of the stuff I've been doing has just been here in the terminal, but I'd be interested to see if it does. I
Well,
wouldn't be
I
surprised.
asked it. I asked it to look at the debug data, and it was like, I can't see that. And I was like, damn it. I
Interesting.
was like,
Okay.
it would seem that you could easily make. It would seem that that would be a plugin from VS Code that would be.
Yeah.
But then I might have like, I was looking at it and it seemed like there was a way to get it to do that. I just didn't like follow up. So
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if you can. Or like another thing you can do as well is like if you have the debug data and you can somehow output it to a file, like if you get anything that you can put in a file in the code base, then you can just have Copilot read the file. So that's
yeah,
another thing as well. Like if you can pipe debug data into like a text file, then you're just like, okay, read the text file and it can figure it out. So,
yeah, I pasted it in and it like fixed the problem for me. So
oh yeah. All right, so just to recap what happened, right? So I have this custom orchestration script that allows me to run the server and the client or whatever your setup is in the same kind of terminal here, and I can combine all of those logs together. Once again, just ask Copilot to tell you how I did it, and it'll give you a nice little tutorial. But then Copilot ran all the tests. It determined, okay, there's nothing that actually like tests for this. So I'm going to write a new test. I'm going to add in a bunch of logs. I'm going to run the new test. It reads all the logs, it figures out what the issue is, and then it can fix the issue. So as long as we have that, then we're pretty much done. So here I'm just going to run the server again, npm run dev, and then we'll just make sure that everything's good. And then we'll move on to the last section, which is debugging the database. So we can probably get to that, and then we'll wrap up for the day. All right, so let's come over here to the browser and we'll verify that this got fixed. So I'll log in. So now if I toggle this to done, this should stay as high. Cool. So it looks good. So I can manually verify the test. That's kind of the last step, and then we're good to go. All right, any final questions on debugging in multi environments?
That's a lot.
It is a lot, yeah. Again, it's being recorded. All of it's kind of written out in that one sheet. But if you have any questions about this, like after the workshop, just let me know. I can help you set it up. But I just wanted to kind of show that process because this is very powerful, although it will take probably a while to set up and integrate into your own code base. Okay. All right, so last section, this one's a little bit lighter, a little bit easier. We'll end off on something kind of fun, which is how do we debug the database? So let's see here. So we just talked about this, very, very involved, very complicated, but very powerful as well. So the last thing we're going to talk about is having Copilot query the database. So in this case, we have a Postgres database that's running in this app. And this can kind of apply to any type of database, but we're going to use something called an MCP server. So an MCP server it's basically like an intermediary between an AI agent and some service or some server. So we have Postgres, which is kind of like this database over here, and then we have Copilot, and then the MCP server will help those two things to communicate. So the MCP server will provide Copilot with tools which it can use to kind of query things and ask questions, get information from the database. So what we want to do then here is we're going to check out the last branch, which is debug3. So I'm just going to reset everything here in Git. So reset hard head, or you can commit that. And then we're going to say git switch debug3. All right, so like I said, we'll end on something a little bit lighter, a little bit easier. The last section was definitely a lot, but hopefully you all got something out of it. So let's take a look here where we are in the document. So this is that little one sheet. We just did debugging full stack bugs. Now we're debugging the database. We're on branch debug3. So make sure that you either commit or reset everything and then git switch to debug3. So now we're going to look at what's going on with the database. So let's see here. I'm just going to clean some of these up. Okay. Now, in Taskflow, we have a folder here. Let me see. Where are you? It's the Prisma folder. So Prisma it's basically like a technology that allows us to easily interface with the Postgres database. So in this folder, we have a seed file, seed.js, and this just has like, it's just like adding in a bunch of data into our database. So you could look at this as kind of the contents of the database. Like this is what Taskflow, this is all the data that it has. So if you want to see like what's actually in here, you just look in this seed file. And then what you could do is you could run like npm run db :seed, and that will, or actually, let me see here. Don't want to run that. We would want to run, so when we run the seed, it's trying to add in all these things and they're already in there, so we can't do that. So you could run npm run db reset. And what that'll do is it'll clear out the database and then it'll reseed it with information. So if you're coming back to play with Taskflow in the future, anything that you put in here will get added into the database and then you can just kind of reset there. So that's a way where you can see, just with your eyes what's in the database. But how do we get Copilot to see what's in the database? Well, this is where that MCP is going to come in, Model Context Protocol. So let's talk a little bit about how this works. So up here in the .vs code folder, there's a file here called mcp.json. And what this has is a bunch of configurations for MCP servers. So like I said, the easiest way to think about an MCP server is it sits in between Copilot and your database, or it could sit in between Copilot and like Jira. This is one for Jira. This is one for Figma. So I could use Copilot to access information about Figma files or Jira tickets, or in this case, about the data that's inside of my database. So it's kind of like a proxy server, but it exposes these things called tools, which the agent can call. So if you want to look more into MCP, I definitely recommend that. These things are really powerful. It's pretty much like the core functionality of these AI agents is built around MCP, built around being able to access different services and different tools. That's kind of at the core of a lot of these technologies. So I have a MCP server here, which is um, it's actually a little bit custom. So in this dev containers environment, I have a script here which is called start Postgres MCP. So we're in like a Docker container. You don't need to worry too much about this, but we're inside a Docker container. So in order for me to be able to like access this Postgres MCP, I have to like start up another little Docker instance that spawns this MCP server. There's a lot of like stuff here.
Okay.
Again, yeah.
Sven? Was geht? Sven? Sven? Okay.
So in order for this to work, I have this little script here. This is just kind of what's necessary to show the demo. Again, you can have Copilot explain this to you. It's pretty simple what's going on here. But there's this MCP server which is called Crystal DBA. So you can just look this up if you want. And so this is just like an open source package, and you can read about how it works, but it integrates in with Docker really well. So you need some sort of an MCP server that you can use to connect with the database, okay? And that's kind of how this works. I know it's a little complicated, but again, Copilot can kind of explain this stuff and walk you through it step by step, help you to set it up if you need to. But then over here in this mcp.json file, I have this little configuration here, and it's basically just saying like run this script, which starts up this MCP server that lets us connect to Postgres, and then this is like the database URL. Okay. All right. Any questions so far? I know this is kind of a lot. Hopefully you're all following along though.
Sorry, quick question about the start Postgres MCP. Does
Yeah.
that include like the definition of all the tools and everything for the LLM to be able to like intelligently interface with the database?
This script does not, but so this is like the open source project here, Crystal DBA, that will have all of the tools. I'm not 100% sure where that would be. But I can show you. So in VS
Okay.
Code, here in the chat window, there's this little like tools icon here at the bottom right, configure tools. If you click on that, then you can kind of click through here and we could find it. So this one is called Postgres. And then down here, we can see all the tools. So this is kind of a good thing to point out. These are basically like tools that Copilot can use to interface with Postgres. So it could analyze the database's health, it could query indexes, execute SQL, get top queries, list objects, etc. It can do a lot of things. Now, one thing I will point out, this MCP server is very powerful. So it can run SQL, it can do pretty much anything to the database. If you're doing this in like a production app, you'd probably want to either write your own custom MCP or use one that's more secure, or you can like check off some of these tools. So if you don't want this to be able to execute SQL, you could check this off. Once again, this is just down here in this little tools icon, kind of at the bottom right. Click on that. But I'm going to leave all of that checked. And then what we want to do from VS Code is we can actually run this server. So let me just point out real quick for the sake of the recording what's happening here. So in Docker desktop up here at the top right, there's a little ship icon. You can just go to the dashboard. So you can see here we have like Taskflow running. This is the Postgres database, and then this is like the Next.js app. When I run this, it's actually going to spawn a new Docker container for the MCP server. So now this server is acting as like a middleman between VS Code and the Postgres database. Okay, so that's just kind of how it's set up from an orchestration standpoint. You don't really need to worry about that too much. But now that this is running, and then you could stop it and like restart it if you want. Let's see. Yeah. But now we can just talk to Copilot about it. So I could just say like, hey, how many users are in the database? And now Copilot should be smart enough to figure out, okay, I need to figure out what's in the database. Let me use this MCP tool that I have. Or maybe it's not smart enough to do that. So why don't we tell it? So here I can say how many users in the database use the Postgres MCP. Sometimes it'll use it, sometimes it won't. But if you specifically say use the MCP server, it'll do that. So then over here, this is kind of what it looks like when it runs an MCP command. So you can see it's running this execute SQL tool for the Postgres MCP server, and then it's just going to run this SQL. Again, from a security standpoint, you might not want it to be able to do this. It just depends. But this is just an example to kind of show you. So I'll go ahead and allow this. So that passed. It got back the data about the user count. It knows there's 7 users. We could query it some more, like list out their names. And so what this gives you is basically an intelligent way to query the database instead of having to write SQL queries yourself or go in and look through some user interface. Copilot can just go run the SQL scripts, do anything, and then it'll come back and like tell you what's going on with the database. So you can imagine like there's a lot of different types of bugs where maybe the data in the database is malformed, or maybe there's a table that has an extra column that you don't want in there, or there's something happened in the database and you want to be able to see what's going on. This is a good way to do that. So now we know all the users in the database. That's pretty cool. And again, like if I run the app, so let's just run this app real quick. Not this. So let's see. All right, so we run the app. And I'll just to kind of prove that this is actually working. So we can go to the team page. Now I could tell Copilot like make everyone's name lowercase. So now it should go in and it'll execute this SQL query where it'll set all of their names to the lowercase version. And then over here on the app, when we refresh, actually pulls that data live from the database. So again, you might not want Copilot to have this much power with your database, but if you do, it's super good. And there are other MCP servers that you could look into that have more like fine-grained access control. But this is just kind of the main sort of idea behind this. Okay. So we have about 10 minutes left, and I think this is probably a good place to start wrapping up. Does anyone have any final questions about what's going on here or anything in the presentation?
Now I'm going to have to cut out, but thank you very much for your time. It was a
Yeah,
great presentation.
great to see you, Howard. Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.
Cool. So if there's not any additional questions, then I'll just show you all one last thing. This is kind of the icing on the cake. The last thing that you can do, which is you can run sort of a debugging report from Copilot. This is really powerful. So I'm actually just going to check out the main branch. So we'll check out main. And I have another script up here, or a prompt. So up here, .github prompts. And this one is called, oh no, maybe I got rid of this one. Yeah, I must have. Okay, well, we can rewrite it. So I'm going to make a new file here, and we'll call this analyze code.mprompt. So this is a really good prompt for you to start developing in your own code base. And I'll just kind of put kind of like a small one here. But the idea here is we want to write a prompt that will ask Copilot to look through our code base and try to find vulnerabilities, security vulnerabilities, try to find bugs that maybe aren't being surfaced in the test, try to find places where things are not optimal or where things can be better. So it's not so much passive, it's more active, right? I'm actively asking Copilot to look through my code and try to find things that are wrong. So I could say, I want you to look through the entire code base and find areas where there are obvious bugs or things that need to be cleaned up. So, this could be kind of like you could continue to sort of flesh this out more. But the idea is that Copilot would look through and it would be able to figure out, okay, here's all these different areas where um, we could improve things or things could be better, and then you just kind of have it run. So be thorough and make sure that you're not missing anything. Whatever you'd want to put in here. So I'll just kind of run this. Again, you'd probably want to spend more time writing that out. Oh yeah, so we could also say like, look for security vulnerabilities, areas where memory management can be improved, and places where the code might be made more efficient. So anything you want to check for here, Copilot's kind of writing it for me. Cool. So then let's run this and we'll see what happens. And if you're going to do something like this, you want to make sure that you're using like a powerful model. You definitely don't want to be using those kind of smaller models. So we can just kind of look at this for a few seconds and then we'll kind of wrap up. So it's just reading through all these files, it's analyzing all of that. And then at the end, it'll probably output like a single document. Okay, so while this is running then, I'm just going to kind of wrap things up. I'll give you all your, 8 minutes back. And once again, if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to me over email. I'll be reaching out to all of you with the video recording. And if you have any questions, I would recommend just take Taskflow and have Copilot analyze it. It can answer your questions. It'll kind of know everything that's happening here because I built a lot of this with Copilot. So that's probably your best resource. But once again, don't be a stranger. Feel free to reach out. Also, so I'm a consultant at this company, Batovi. So for those of you who aren't employees there, a lot of employees are here. Yeah, we do all sorts of consulting. We run these workshops and these trainings for companies, so we can run them for your employees. We can help you set up like some advanced AI workflows. We have a bunch of cool things that we've been working on. We're cutting edge with this research stuff. So if you want like an AI expert, I can come out and help, or we have other people that can come out and help. So yeah, just a quick plug there for Batovi. But otherwise, thank you all so much. And if you want to stick around and watch this finish, then that's great. But otherwise, yeah, have a great day and look out for that video recording.
Yo, thanks for the class.
Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. So
Have a
yeah,
good day.
yeah, you too. All right, so for those of you who stuck around, let's see what happened here. So it looks like it just output things here. So what we might want to do is say, output this in a markdown. So this will just get output into a markdown file.
Hey Mike, I have a question.
Yeah.
I see that some of the MCP server or yeah, MCP servers are giving me error. They're not running or starting. Is it because it's not my internal host, or I should be having my own Figma server or stuff?
Yeah, so it would depend. So the Figma one, this isn't going to start unless you have the Figma desktop app open. So
Okay.
that would need to be open in dev mode. I can help you set that up if you want to explore that. And then
Mm-hmm.
Atlassian, let's see if this one runs. So with Atlassian, you're gonna have to authenticate. It should work here. I think I'm already authenticated, so it just kind of works for me. But yeah, that one, what it'll probably do is like prompt you to log in to Atlassian, and then you'd have to hook it up to like the Bitovi internal.
Yeah, that allowed me, but Figma didn't. So Figma
Okay.
might have to I'll have to open the app you're saying or desktop for Figma.
Yeah, I can show you how to do it right now. So you would just open
Mm-hmm.
up Figma and you're going to need dev mode enabled so someone can give you access to that. But
Mm-hmm.
in Figma, you would open up the designs. So for example, I have designs for Taskflow right here. And you can go into dev mode. And actually, I don't know why this isn't working. Hold on. Yeah, sometimes with the Figma, it's like you have permission to use some stuff, but not other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so anyway, let's see. Yeah, so here I'm in dev mode. So that's just this little toggle down here. And you'll see there's this MCP section. So there's like a server status. Um, so let me see here. What this should do now is it'll allow me to, like, I can query any of these designs. So I could copy a link to this selection, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And then over here in the Copilot window, I could say, like, tell me about this Figma design. Just paste in the link, and then it will use the Figma MCP.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's getting the design context. So this will give me like, I think it'll normally it outputs like an image. Yeah, so it'll give you like the raw HTML too for the design. This is pretty cool. Screenshot.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. It's super powerful. This is where we're integrating this into a lot of our AI workflows. It's pretty cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
Looks good. Have you used this MCP or this whole thing for generating documents as well, not just coding? Like if you have various resources, have you generated documents using those resources?
What do you mean by resources? Do you mean like other context files or?
Context, architectures, or images or PDFs and stuff?
Yeah, 100%. So that's one of the cool things with Figma is like it'll give you these screenshots and then
Okay.
Copilot can reason about screenshots. So like
Okay.
it could look through the image and it could kind of parse it and break it up. You can
Mm-hmm.
see it has like the key features here. So yeah, one good thing to do is if you have like you create your own custom folder. So like, you can call it my context or something. And then in here, where did that go? Here, in my
Okay.
context, yeah, you could put like images or whatever, and then you could just drag that into the Copilot window here, and
Mm-hmm.
then Copilot will look through all of it and it can generate whatever you want. So it's super useful.
Okay. This is really powerful. Thank you.
It is, yeah, it's very powerful. Cool. All right, so then to kind of wrap this up for all of you still remaining brave souls. So now we have this code report which tells us like there's 7 issues that it identified. So this is like active debugging, missing session expiration. So all of these things that we would want to then implement, and it talks about how you would fix them, etc. So then this could be worked into that debugging cycle as well. It's be pretty powerful. Cool. Any final questions then? Otherwise, I'm going to end the meeting and I'll be available to chat whenever.
Nope. Thank you. Have a good day.
Yeah, sounds good. All right. See you all.